Greetings and welcome. So I'm really excited about this video because I'm a huge math nerd. Yeah, I'm hoping you enjoy it as well. I keep it very simple. All I need is Google Calculator. I have a lot of stuff here in Microsoft Word. I have a lot of notes I'll be using. I got some data as well. But yeah, so it's a very interesting topic. But I'm going to prove mathematically and using some common sense and the Bible just to prove that it was very easy for Noah to repopulate the entire planet to 8 billion people in just the span of 4,370 years. It is very doable. It is not a stretch of the imagination. And the evolutionists are basically wrong. It did not take millions or, let's say hundreds of thousands of years for, the population to increase to 8 billion. And I'm going to use, I'm going to prove it. So let's start from the very beginning. So I'm not going to basically, I'm going to show calculations. For this first example, I will show you these calculations. From here on, I'll just, I'll skip them. I'm just doing this for the first time, just so you know that I actually do know what I'm talking about. I understand the math behind it. And you don't actually need to know a lot of math. If you are a high school student in an algebra class and you know something about logarithms and exponential models, then that's good enough. So let's say this is the formula for exponential growth. Population is exponential. Things increase very quickly in the exponent. When it's exponential, like very very fast. So I'm going to just show you the math here. So we're starting at 8 billion people. That's A. That's so you want to get to 8 billion, right? On the other side here, we're starting with 8. P right here, that is going to be 8. We have 8 people. We have Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. That's 8 people. So we're going from 8 to 8 billion. So we're going to multiply the population by 1 billion. So you can have a 1 billion fold increase in just 4,370 years. R is what we're trying to figure out. That's the rate. T is the time in years. It is 4,370 years. So that is, so that's the time because Noah's flood occurred approximately 2,348 BC, give or take a few years or so. And right now it's the year 2020. So yeah, 4,370 years. That's a fair enough approximation. So that's it. And then E is just the constant E. So if you took algebra recently, maybe hope you might remember this formula, but this is the formula for exponential growth. So I plugged in all my variables. I do the math. I divide. So I divide both sides by 8. So I have 1 billion equals E times 4,370. That's my next step right here. I just divided both sides by 8. And then in this step, now how did I get to this step? I took the natural log of both sides. So just letting you know that, so you take the natural log of 1 billion, you will get 20.723. You could check this all on your own if you want. I used Google Calculator. That's all I needed to prove this. So 20.723 equals 4,370 R. I divide both sides by 4,370. I end up with this. And then I convert this decimal into a percentage. So 1, 2, approximately 0.47% growth per year. So basically this means that for 4,370 years, the population increased by approximately 0.47% per year. Now, you might be wondering, what does that mean? Is that a big number? Is that a little number? So I'm going to explain this right now. So 0.47% is actually quite low. I'm going to show you some data just to give you a point of reference. So if we go back here, this is the data I have. So this is the Google calculator. We don't really need this. I just had this just in case. So right here, world population clock. So this is showing you the growth rate throughout the years. So from like 1951 all the way to the present, you can see the growth rate per year. As you can see, it's been kind of low since the late 80s. So it was really high. Like in 1968, you had a peak of like 2% per year. 2% growth per year is huge. I mean, if we still had that, we would have like an extra billion people on the planet right now if we still had that since the late 60s. But unfortunately, around this time is when you had a little past this is when you had Roe versus Wade. You started to have people were having abortions, and as you can see, that is affecting the growth rate. That is one of the reasons why it dropped so much. Um, so right here, so it started dropping. So 2% was a good peak back in like 1968. It dropped a bit, then it went up a little bit. In 88, it kind of it's ever since 88, it's just been going downhill since then. So right now it's hovering at about 1%. It actually dropped quite a bit over the last 2 years. Now it's like 0.8%. I think that's probably because of COVID. Because I'm guessing COVID probably dropped it a little bit, but also probably because people were, I don't know, social distancing or something. But something like that. It probably had an effect. Um, people were, I don't know, we're going out as much or something. So I don't know. So there's probably a lot of reasons why it dropped so much over the last 2 years. So 1% right here. So like 1% still pretty good by our standards. So the average is 0.47%. So it's not even half. It's not even half of what it's hovering at right now, or what it was the last few years. So it is very reasonable that this is a very reasonable percentage. Like it would not take a lot for per people to turn into 8 billion. 0.47%. Now there are some arguments against what I'm saying, and that's why I have a lot of. That's why this video is going to be so long, and I'm going to split it up into two parts because I have a lot to say. Because there's counter arguments, and I have counter arguments to those counter arguments. So 0.47% is pretty good if you could take into consideration that it's about 1% right now, and that in the late 60s it was like 2%. It used to be a lot higher. So anyway, so by historical standards, 0.47%, very, very reasonable. Yeah, there isn't much. And as you can see, there's a lot of fluctuation. This is important to understand in the exponential, for population growth. We're using real data. It doesn't just fit a nice math model because it's people, it's real life. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of variables. So as you can see, the growth rate fluctuates quite a bit just over the last 50, 60 years. So throughout history, this percentage was much lower. There were a lot of times when this percentage was much lower than 0.47%. It was zero. There were times when it was negative. There were people died, the Black Death. There were a lot of times when this percentage could have dropped, which is actually what I'm going to talk about, how, people often died from wars, famine, disease. But before that, I would like to talk about, yeah, there's a bit of a typo here. I'm going to fix this. So I wrote linear regression by accident. So yeah, first of all, before I move on to my next topic, I'd like to just kind of, go off just a little bit off to the side here. Now, you need to properly understand math. So you need to understand exponential model and statistics before making conclusions. You can't use for short time approximations, right? So this is very important because I just like to mention this. A few years ago, I watched a video where a Christian statistician did this, except, well, he didn't really show the math. He just said that he did the math and he said, yeah, it's about 0.47%. I think he said like 0.44%, but pretty much he got the same number I got because the math he used was about the same. So he got about the same results. So that makes sense. Now, someone else said, some atheist, I guess, thought that the data, that this statistician didn't know what he was talking about. So he made a video criticizing this video, and then he had like a whole bunch of points that were like supposed to be counter arguments, and they were pathetic. This guy that made this video, he did not know any math, he did not understand any statistics, and there were a lot of people praising this video. This video got a lot of views. I remember how many it got, but it got a lot of views. And this guy had no clue what he was talking about. I easily could debunk every single point he made because he literally did not know what he was talking about. His arguments to him sounded very logical, but it was a very bad case of Dunning-Kruger, this guy. So he thought he was being smart. He was disproving this Christian statistician, mathematician, and he didn't know what he was talking about. So that's why I want to bring this up, because there might be some of you that think that they understand math and stats and that this doesn't make any sense. And they're going to try to backdate this. So basically, I'll explain what he tried to do. So he said, oh, well, if you plug in, like you started with 8 people. Well, according to this model, what if you did it for like 10 years? And then he would try to he would use these arguments that sounded very smart, but anybody that understands statistics and linear regression and the exponential model knows that you cannot backdate stuff on short time scales. Exponential model is very sensitive to small fluctuations, so you can't like this could be good for like future predictions, but if you try to go back and try to do it for like 100 years or even 1,000 years or something and plug it back in with this percentage growth, it's not going to make sense. Your answers will be off from reality. So basically, unless you understand statistics and mathematics and you understand all of this and you've studied this in school, um, don't try to make videos disproving this stuff. Okay, like you any status, basically it was ridiculous. Basically, it just shows how easy it is to lie to people. Yeah. So, but anyway, I'm showing you the math here just to confirm that it's real. This is how you're actually supposed to do it, and it does make sense. So anyway, that was just me ranting, but just know that this stuff does make sense. You can talk to a statistician, a mathematician; they will tell you this is correct. Um, Anyway, so now I'm getting on to the main topic here. Argument. So people often died from wars, famine, and disease for most of history, right? So this is the counter argument. This is the main counter argument against what I just showed, is that, well, right now we're experiencing, like right now, this is all amazing. For the last 200 or 300 years, we had amazing population growth. We're healthy. People aren't dying from wars, famine, and disease quite as often. Because in the past, this was serious. Like disease, this killed lots of people. Lots and lots of people died from disease. This killed more than anything else. Disease was like the worst thing. Wars were pretty bad too. Famine, that was a real thing. But like these three combined, they killed a lot of people. And population did go negative sometimes. Yes, that is a fact. I'm not going to argue that. That is true. For most of history, those were the facts. So that's what they're saying, that, well, this doesn't really make sense because, well, this was negative for for most of history. So obviously, 0.47% isn't really what happened. That's what the evolutionists are going to argue. That, the last 200 or 300 years, that is an anomaly. That is not how it was for most of history. And I do understand that. That is a very, very good argument. So that's why I have to have a counter argument for that. So I'm going to take this one step further. We're going to do part two. So yes, this is a very, very legitimate argument. So I'm gonna backdate this. I'm gonna use their numbers. I'm gonna use the numbers from the historians. So apparently, there's some approximations and ideas that historians have about what the population was at different times. So I went back as far as possible, and the like this is probably, they say this is accurate. 50 million people in 1000 BC. Okay, so I'm going off their numbers. So I'm trying to go back as far as possible while still being accurate. Obviously, the farther back in time you go, the less information you can't have as accurate numbers. So according to them, these are their numbers. It's not something I came up with on my own. They say there were 50 million people in 1000 BC. So what I'm going to do now is, for part two of this, I'm going to try to get 8 people to become 50 million. So we're going from 8 billion to 8 people to 50 million in about a little over 1,300 years. So from the time of Noah's flood in 2,348 BC to 1,000 BC. So that is 1,348 years. So we have that as our time frame. We have that many years to go from 8 to 50 million. So I'm going to show how this is possible. It is not a stretch of the imagination for this to still be possible. By doing this, I'm basically, this way we're not taking into consideration the modern hypergrowth that we've been having for the last 200 years. And we're also not worried about like the Black Death, which happened after. So up to 1000 BC, right? So it seems fairly reasonable. I'm not going to show all the calculations this time. We're going to speed it up a little bit because you might get bored by me showing you all the math. So we're going from about 50 million, so 50 million people, and we're going to start with 8 people. We're still doing exponential model. This time it's just 1,348 years. This is because, Noah's flood minus the, 1,000. So so we have 1,348 years to work with. So if we do all the math, we come up with 1.16% growth per year. That is much higher than the 0.49%. So the 0.47% growth, that is averaged out over the last 4,370 years. If we're just looking from the time of Noah's flood to 1,000 BC, their 50 million mark, that's what they say happened. So I'm going off their numbers. That the percentage rate's much higher. So as you can see, yes, it is more difficult to make it work, but 1.16% growth is still very easy to justify. This is not an abnormally high number. I'm going to show you again. If you look at our numbers right here, we had 2% back in the 60s. 1.16% is actually just a little bit higher than what we have right now. So it's actually not that unrealistic to have those kinds of growth rates. So, and you would only need that for the first, from the time of Noah's flood to about 1,000 BC, you would need to have about a little over 1%. So it's still very realistic. Now, I understand some people are going to argue. They're going to say, well, what about all the death rate? The death rate was super high throughout most of history. So yeah, I do have counter arguments for that. But anyway, I was just showing you that still pretty realistic, 1.16%. Okay, now, so I'm going to show you some data. This is real stuff. So the current global fertility rate is 2.39. Okay, so that means right now, on average, the average woman has 2.39 kids. Okay, so now what is the percentage growth rate? 1.05. So we're looking for 1.16. So what does that mean? In order to maintain this 1.16% growth rate, to explain it in simpler terms, the fertility rate would only have to be a little bit higher than 2.39. So we're talking like 2.5. Like 2.5, maybe 2.6. It's probably more like 2.5. So if half the women had 2 kids and half the women had 3 kids for most of history, then that would be it. That would be enough. That would totally be enough. And as I'm going to explain right now, for most of history until the recent time period, women had much more than 2 or 3 kids. In fact, women were having like 6, 7, 8 kids per family. That was normal. Birth rates have been historically high, but so have death rates. Low birth, low death rates are a recent trend. So, yeah, in the modern world, birth rates are kind of low, and so are death rates. But in the old world, back in the old days, for most of history, birth rates were high and death rates were high, unfortunately. So, basically, if the death rates exceeded the birth rates, then yeah, you would lose people. So you would only need to have an extra you need to have like 2.5 kids per family to grow up to become adults and to have their own kids for this to work. Not that difficult. If women were having like 7 kids a family, or like let's say 7.5, then if every third one survived, that would still be enough. That would be 2.5 out of 7.5. So yeah, because the birth rates were historically so high, even though the death rates were still kind of high, this still works. The 1.16% growth is not a stretch of the imagination. If the global fertility rate would only have to be like 2.5, and women are having like 7 kids, 8 kids, a family, which was, like I said, historically completely normal until recently. Like I'm going to show you some data here. So like right now it's like 2.39, 2.4. This is in our chart. This is the global fertility. Like, so 2.4 kids per woman right here. Now look at this. This is like back in the 60s. Back in the late 60s, it was like 5. Like literally in 50 years, it changed so much. So what's going on right now, that is not the historic norm. The historic norm was what was going back in like the late 60s and even before that. 5 kids a family, like, yeah, that was completely normal. And yes, people didn't live as long, but they lived long enough to still have kids. So yeah, basically it's 5. And if you look at the countries, like this is current. So birth rates are very different by country. You have like Europe and Japan and South Korea. They have like almost like very low birth rates. But then you have Africa. Like look at this. You have Niger, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali. You're having like 5, 7, 6 kids. Like look at Niger, like 6.7. That's current. That's right now. Right now, women are having like 6, 7 kids. It's crazy. Their population just like going ridiculously high. And if the death rates aren't that high either, so they're having a huge population. They're having huge population growth. Um, so if you have high birth rates and low death rates, your population goes through the roof. It doesn't really take that long. So right here, so anyway, that's my counter argument is that it still makes sense. The 1.16% is still very reasonable, still makes sense. Now, I still have counter arguments for this. I have more data to show using Bible, common sense, math, all of that. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Let's see. Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So there's a video on the Answers in Genesis channel by Ken Ham. I'm gonna put this in the comments below. So if you're interested, I would watch that video. It's kind of interesting. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty interesting video. He actually has charts. My video is, as you can see, very low budget. I don't have fancy charts, but I do have the math, and I'm showing you how it actually works. So it's a very interesting video. It's like 33, 40 minutes long. If you watch the first few minutes, he has some good charts that actually are on this topic of how, it was very easy for, there to be 8 billion people on the planet. So yeah, that's going to be, I think I'll end this. Maybe I'll make a part two. I think I'll make a part two where I talk about my hypothesis and talk about the genealogy. And I have a few more things to say. I'm going to make this like my second video, where it's very reasonable that, we got to 8 billion, and I'm going to show you my other arguments. So I'm not done. I mean, I'm going to have a second part to this video. So yeah, I'll see you next time.